folks. We're back with another transfer episode of the 6 Yard Line podcast. We've got some new teams to discuss today. How's it going, Noel?
Good, man. I would like more teams to discuss. Why is no one buying any players? Come on, Fulham. Come on, Villa. Come on, Everton. Do something. There's three teams buying everybody, and then there's a bunch of teams adding players quietly, and then there's a whole bunch that's doing absolutely nothing. And I mean,
yeah, you can divide it in basically those four groups. You have the big teams that have basically looking to separate themselves from everyone else.
They're in an arms race, and everybody else is just along for the ride.
Yeah, and then you have probably have five groups. Then you have Arsenal with all these supposedly he's coming. They've only got one. Then you have that group that, depending on who they sell, will determine who they can add. And then you have the bottom who are adding players quietly. They're not getting maybe the big, flashy Fabrizio Romano or David Ornstein, here we go, draws, but they're still adding players. So I guess that's who we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, because you know what, we have to spend quite a bit of time today just going through some of the I had to put Burnley on 2 slides, right? So this was interesting. So, and it's good, it's good for us. And I've got Leeds and Brentford as well in the mix today. And I just thought, let's go with, we might as well start with Burnley because I think they have quietly done quite a bit of business, right? So, I've not watched a lot of Burnley games. There's been some talk about a Burnley player for Toronto FC recently. So, it's kind of a dive into what Burnley's done. And obviously, everybody knows who owns Burnley now, and they do have an American investor. And they also have JJ Watt, the NFL player. So he's a big part of what they're trying to do. And they're trying to stay in the Premier League this year, right? Because the last trip up with Vincent Kompany didn't go as planned.
Nope.
So,
which will be interesting. The fact that, last show we touched on, what was the other Sunderland.
Yeah.
And they seem like they're definitely, hungry to stay up. Right. So what is Burnley doing? Are these additions going to be enough to survive, right? Because that's what it boils down to when you're coming up from the championship and you're not necessarily signing big flashy name players. You have to get your signings right. They have to be able to handle the rigorous schedule of the Premier League, the physicality of the Premier League, if they're not, if they're international players. And again, your budget isn't like the rest of the teams in the Premier League. So it'll be interesting to see how they stack up this time around.
Yeah, I think all the promoted sides, are probably going to spend some money. I think they're all going to spend, 50 to 100 million. I think you guaranteed that, right, from the Premier League. So even if you go back down, you kind of, as long as you've got get outs and everything else. But, like Ipswich has proved, you may go down, but you're going to sell a few players that, could quite easily cover the cost. Obviously, you don't want to sell it for 30 million like Liam Delap because of a relegation release clause. But again, it's just what do you do with it? And, when I was going through Burnley's transfers, you see the first one on the board we have there is Max Waif from Karua. It's a goalkeeper, apparently a very promising young shot stopper. And somebody that, obviously Burnley's goalkeeper right now is in demand too, James Trafford. There was talk of him going to Old Trafford, but that looks like it's going to be Emi Martinez. But,
there's talk of him going to City.
Still in that conversation, right? So I think and City might take a boo at him because obviously I think Edison got a $3 million bid yesterday.
I think depending on what happens with Ederson, we will see if City goes in for Trafford, but there is talk of that, one of the, either Ederson or what's the other keeper's name? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I would assume Ederson's one that would command a bigger payday.
It's
Ederson,
smart from Burnley's standpoint. If you look at it, if there's people looking at your goalkeeper, there's people kind of trying to it happens with any team, right? If you're not in
Yeah.
the top six, the big six, you're always
And,
going
and
to have a backup that's
and
good.
yeah, and Trafford is considered like the future England keeper. He had an outstanding record last year, shutout streak for Burnley. He is and he has Premier League experience. He's not, this wouldn't be a new role for him. So, it would be a major step up going to a team like City. The pressure to succeed would be enormous, but like from a Burnley standpoint, if having even a team like City, you're probably able to increase the return on investment.
Absolutely, and having somebody that can challenge for that spot straight away, day one. That's why they've signed him. They've signed him to compete for the number one spot.
Mm-hmm.
But in truth, I think they just rainy day planning in case unfortunately, one of the things I don't like, but some things, obviously we talk about this with Forest all the time, that there's going to be teams that are quote quote bigger are going to come after your players, and at some point everyone's got a price, and we know that it's the Premier League. It's what happens. Everyone's got a price. It's just who's willing to pay it. And so I think taking care of that is is a good thing. So
Yep.
we'll move on to the left back. I am going to absolutely butcher his first name.
I won't even try.
Hartman.
I'll just say Hartman.
I'm going to call him Mr. Hartman. He arrived from Feyenoord for 7.7 million. A ton of energy down the left. Apparently got a lot of pace, got a lot of admirers. I think this is a little bit of a coup. I think he could be one of those. This is kind of the player that I think you see at Brighton a lot, right? Where they just sign somebody that nobody really knows and they ends up turning into an absolute banger. So he looks like a beast, man. I watched a couple of videos on him last night because I was just really kind of curious. And yeah, he's got some pace. He's got good motor up and down. And in a team like Burnley, where you're going to have to work harder than everybody else, you need guys like this. You really do need guys like this. And
especially with
goodbye.
Especially with pace, because you're talking about the Premier League where you're going to have some of the like world-class wingers attacking you day in, day out. And, you can assume a team like Burnley won't be controlling the possession. They will be under pressure more often than not. So you will need defenders that can handle that pressure, that can run, that, on the counterattack can be effective when you're going for that counter. So, let's see how things turn out. There's always these players that no one really knows of that comes in and just shine. So, if he's hungry and if he feels he's got a lot to prove, this will be a big get for Burnley, and the kind of player that can help solidify their defense.
Yeah, I'm going to skip my own list down here because I think he's, the Burnley have obviously signed Kyle Walker. That's their big off-season signing, and experienced England international, 5 million deal. Since he was a free agent, I don't really know how they kind of work that in, but whatever. But I think having somebody like Kyle Walker, who's been one of the best in the world for the last few years, helping him, yes, it's left back, right back, but the idea is the same. They'll play on opposite sides, but the theory is the same in football. I think will be a good way for him to develop. So, I don't think it's a bad thing. Again, I think what Burnley's done is quite strategic. I do think Burnley's kind of signed some players that you're like, okay, that's interesting. After Kyle, Axel Tuanzebe, obviously, he's been in the news this week. He's suing Manchester United for $1 million. So that's a side note. But, didn't really work out at Ipswich. Didn't really have a great season last year. Ipswich obviously didn't in general. But again, he's a guy that's been around. He's, I actually said of him yesterday to somebody else that I could see him in MLS sooner rather than later because that's generally what will probably happen with him. But again, he's a guy that's been floating around in clubs now for a few years. There's always a player in there, but his health hasn't been the greatest. This was the only one where I looked at Burnley's list and I was like, yeah, this is a Carabao Cup player. This is the FA Cup player. This is not Burnley's starting 11 priority. I just don't think this is, anything exciting, to be honest, if I'm honest.
He's more of a backup piece, to strengthen and I hate to use the word strengthen as if it's a positive stance, but he's not, I agreed. He's probably not there to be the starter, but he's there to, like you said, care about cup run, give him a run. Maybe when you're playing another one of the promoted teams, give him a game time, or for players somewhat nicked, and that's when he's going to get in. And I guess where the advantage is, you can play him as a center back, you can play him as a right back, depending. Maybe they have a game where they're playing three in the back line, right? Who knows? It'll be interesting to see if
he's just. I think he's just there for strength and depth and coverage, and
and that's probably
you've got to sign him. He's not going to cost you a lot of money. He's experienced. He's got all that, right? So
exactly, and that's kind of what it boils down to is teams will sign free agents just for depth because they've got the Premier League experience. He understands the rigors of the league, and
he can do a job. Don't get me wrong. He can do a job at certain times against certain teams. I just think he's too injury prone and too inconsistent in his form, and hence he's been bouncing around.
Yeah.
So, all right. So another one I'm going to butcher. Burnley couldn't have signed less dodgier ones to sign these. Luma Tishanua.
Is it Luma? Luma? I don't see the A. I just say Luma.
That's how I'm pronouncing it. I'm calling him. Winger from Lazio, raw, young, pacey, again, inexperienced in the Premier League, but might be one of those, again, a bit like the left back Hartman, is somebody that I think they're kind of, if you look at what Burnley's doing, they're kind of bringing in a lot of unknowns and seeing what's going to hit and stick. And at 12 million, I don't think it's much of a gamble, right? Because at the end of the day, if Burnley plays very similar to how they did last year, you'll need guys like this. And I think, pace kills in the Premier League. If you can get behind teams on the counter, you saw it with Forest last year with Anthony Elanga. Like Newcastle just paid 55 million for it because pace kills. When you can turn the ball over quickly in transition, and in the Premier League, you don't get those opportunities. And I think if you look at this signing, I think this screams we can hit you on the counter quickly and bang a goal in. And again, hit and miss. Lazio has been a very good team for the last few years. Shout out to our friend Simone, big Lazio fan. But he, again, it's just, this is one of those signings where I'm curious. This is one of those guys that, when we sit down in the first couple of games of the season, you kind of look to see if he makes an impact, right?
And this is the kind of player that they can turn around if he becomes an impactful player, and say they don't have a successful season. He's the kind of player that they can turn around and profit from. And just to let you know the proper pronunciation of his last name, so it's Loum Chauna. So the T is silent. It's Chauna. Yeah.
Thank God we've got Marcus Edwards up next.
Don't think either of us can screw that one up.
From Sporting Lisbon, 8.4 million, add-ons, creative on the flanks. Again, we just talked about it. You can see what they're trying to do, right? And if you look at Jaden Anthony, they brought him from Bournemouth. You can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to have some options down the sides. I think they can get down a lot of teams, and I think a lot of teams sat there and watched Forest last year get down the sides of teams, right, at pace. And it's not a bad move, honestly. I don't think it's a bad move. And again, all these guys are in that 8 million to 10 million range. I don't think it's, you're going to throw a couple of add-ons. We generally know what the add-ons are always going to be. 10% sell-on fee. If they make, European football, there's another, couple $100,000 in there for somebody. And I think if you look at, I'll see Jaden Anthony, the only difference is he played last year for them on loan, had a good spell. And then I'll see they continue to offer him a deal long-term permanently. So I think it's worked out good for Bournemouth. We eventually, when Bournemouth signs more than a goalkeeper, we'd like to talk about their departures and their arrivals. But right now, Bournemouth's doing good business, a bit like Brighton. They seem to be open for business. But, again, if this guy played there last year, and one thing I would say, kind of we'll get into Bashir Humphreys in a minute, but what Burnley did they took a lot of players on loan last year, and then this year they're making sure that they start the Premier League season with them. I always say this about Forest. Forest had that happen where they came up with some players on loan, and then we couldn't get them because they went to other teams, and obviously some what's his name went to Spurs, the right back that we had on loan from Middlesbrough ended up at Spurs, and what I see Burnley doing here is just hey, we've got this deal with these players, we want to confirm those deals so they're in the Premier League with us. So they got Jaden Anthony, and then I think Bashir Humphries, which is the again signed from Chelsea, which not a shocker, 10 million. Solidifies the back line. He played very well last year. Looks a very good prospect.
Well, it makes sense, right? Like, and I'm sure Burnley had in their deal, in their loan contract, that they had the option to buy. And maybe they even had the first. I don't know if you can put that in there, like first option to buy, because
First
seeing what's
refusal.
happened.
It does
Well,
happen.
well, because I mean, let's be real. Seeing what's happened to a team like Forest that gets promoted with a bunch of loanies that you realize they could be assets in your first year in the Premier League, but if you don't have that security in the contract, another team's going to come in, right? And like you said, like no disrespect to you guys, but at that when you were first coming up, Spurs definitely looked like more of a better option for a player than a Forest, right? So you can see why, if you're Burnley probably did it wisely with how they structured these deals, the loan deals initially, where they were able to turn around and buy these players, right? Because you need to have those deals when you're going from Championship to Premier League. You need to be able to build without having to totally revamp your roster. You want to have a core of players that have played together and know each other, and you already, from a coach, their strengths.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the only one that I think the only we'll go on the forward in a second, but I think the only one that I think Burnley's interesting is obviously Josh Brownhill. Had a banging season last season. And we have to talk about him because he was out of contract. He's had an absolute banger of a season. There is a lot of the bottom half of the Premier League teams looking at him. We're talking about him because obviously he's been linked with Toronto FC quite heavily as a designated player. He's 29 years old, I believe. And I guess a guy that's not made a ton of money in his career
And
would
he's
make
looking for
sense.
payday.
This is his payday, right?
Yep.
And, if Burnley's going to get him back and Burnley brings him in, he's going to want to get paid. And I think that's a fair reflection because at the end of the day, getting money that can change your family's future now and generations forward is a very big difference. So it'll be open to see if they sign him, but he had an absolutely fantastic season for Burnley. I know a lot of fans of other teams kind of said, oh, he's actually really good. If TFC gets him, then he's a player that you kind of need.
Yep.
So that's the still be to decided. But they have got Zion Fleming. They signed from Millwall. I'll be honest, this is one of those transfers I did not know an awful lot about. Again, they're bringing in a guy that's just looking to do a job. He's obviously got championship experience, not played in the Premier League before. So again, this is one where I'm like, well, at 7 million, it's low risk. If you get relegated and you're thinking about that, because I think it's smart that teams do think about that, then you can keep him for a couple of years and he can score goals in the championship because he's got experience of that. And some people think that's negative. I don't. I think it's very realistic in this day and age. When you look at the teams that have come out of the championship in the last couple of years, it's been hard. You've got a lot of success. Don't get me wrong. You've got the Forest, Brentfords, Brightons of the world. Even the Fulham's gone up and stayed up. But there's a lot of teams that come up and go straight back down. Come up, straight back down. And I think Burnley are smart. If you look at their recruitment, and what I would say is all their recruitment seems to be fairly young. They're fairly into a certain system. And if they do drop out, they're not paying huge amounts of money to these guys. You may sell one or two, but you can keep your core intact and go again the following year in the championship.
That's
Really
the thing, right? Most of these teams nowadays and Burnley's been there before. They were just in the Premier League 2 years ago, so they know exactly, like, you can't overspend, go crazy, because if it doesn't work out, it actually affects you when you drop back down to the championship, and then you end up having to sell a bunch of players just to balance the books, and then you end up maybe being a team like Luton that ends up getting relegated again, back-to-back relegations versus, having an opportunity to fight back up. So
Yeah, my last
it's
thing on
smart
them, I
business.
would just say is I think they seem to, as an ownership, have learned from that 2 years. You mentioned it just then, right? I think they learned from it. I think they've looked at it and gone, okay, well, we tried to do this, 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 and this, and it didn't work. And it
Yep.
looks like they've got a clear, concise plan in who they're recruiting, what they're doing, and they seem to have a rainy day plan. And I kind of really respect that, because at the end of the day, we talked about it with the goalkeeper, but we talked about like the young players they're bringing in. That seems like somebody has sat down and gone, look, we did this last time. It didn't work at all. Let's do something different. Let's have a plan A, plan B. And let's be honest, it's not often you get relegated from the Premier League and your coach gets the Bayern Munich job, right? So, you did something well, obviously won a title last year. But, just to wrap up Burnley, I think so far, I think they've been, they've got some interesting players. They've got some interesting recruitment, but they seem to have a plan. And it's very hard to say that about some of the teams in the Premier League at the moment.
I mean, we haven't done our prediction show yet, but I'll tell you right now, first of all, we already did Sunderland. Now we're doing Burnley. Watching the moves that these teams are making and not seeing some of the Premier League teams from last season make any significant moves makes me wonder, like, could we see a shift this coming season where more than one team stays up?
Maybe. I think again, it's like how well they start, right? At the end of the day, if you start really well and get enough points early, I think you'll get a couple of those teams. I do think there'll be a surprise relegation this year.
I agree.
I
agree.
do generally have this gut feeling that we haven't done our predictions, and I normally like to see who they've signed, and I'll be honest, like these all could be complete flops for Burnley. No idea.
100%.
But at the end of the day,
they can get it right as well.
Yeah, you can get it right. So it's 50-50. So again, it's just one of those fun things to watch to see how they go. But from what I've seen so far on the players, I just watched videos yesterday on a bunch of their players that they've signed. They seem to have an identity. It seems to be a fit and a formula. And I think that's the right way of handling the Premier League, as opposed to just hit and hope and hopefully you get the right results.
Yeah. All right. That's it for this week. As usual, make sure you guys have smashed that like button. We appreciate. Yeah, we're getting a lot more views, a lot more comments. I'm sure people are starting to recognize or YouTube is recognizing our video in the algorithm. So that's thanks to all of you guys. So again, subscribe, leave comments, and again, smash that like button.
Yeah, no, thanks for watching. We enjoyed putting out the content. We are working on trying to get more content out daily for you guys. So yeah, it's keeping us entertained, and we do enjoy the comments. They do make me laugh. They give me a good chuckle.
Yeah, even if they're
calling me a Wally. I know what a Wally is. I had to explain to Sean what a Wally is.
Yes.
So
we have thick skin, thankfully.
Yeah, I've been called a lot worse in the stadium, so it's okay.
There you go. All right, folks, that's it for me, Noel.
That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
All right, talk to you guys next week. Peace.